Today's Sunday, and it's Tes Vav Kislev, the 15th day in the month of Kislev, and everybody is celebrating what they're calling Shnas HaTishim. And I was a Marash Cheda about it. I poured water on it, but who knows? I don't know. I'm able to admit I'm wrong. Shnas HaTishim, you could say about a birthday. Because in a birthday, you're not measuring days, you're measuring years. Anniversaries is anniversaries. But I just saw a clip that Zalman Garari told the Rebbe in Memches. It's so fortuitous. It's heartbreaking to watch on the one hand, but on the other hand, it was the last opportunity. He said to the Rebbe that 10 years before, when the Rebbe had his 50th wedding anniversary, the Rebbe gave me a bracha that I should be able to give the bracha to the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin on their 60th anniversary. So he says to the Rebbe, now is only 59, but we're going into the 60th year. So he says, thank you. And it turns out that it was good that because the next year was after the Histalkus of the Rebbetzin. So that was sobering. It was sobering, very powerful to watch. And how the Rebbe listens. I mean, I'm not going to say that you could see anything in the Rebbe's body language that suggests anything, but they will fasten this clip. He accepted it and he responded to it. So we're in the 90th year. Yesterday and today is the 89th wedding anniversary of the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin, and we're in the 90th year. The word that I love so much, I probably said it on Friday here also, is that it's such a great story. It's a story that has all the Rebbe ingredients, or many of the Rebbe ingredients. The Rebbe was sitting Shiva for the Rebbetzin, and people came to Menachem Ovel. And if you remember then, the door was open. You could come into Menachem Ovel 3 times every day. Anybody who wanted got in line, and there was no constraints. It wasn't like you could only come once. You come as many times as you wanted and be Menachem Ovel. That's how it was. And when people who were Nashim Chshurim would come, they would have a seat, they would sit down and they would chat with the Rebbe for a few minutes, and then they would move on and the line would continue. Or however the arrangements were, I don't know those particulars. So one of the people who came was a representative of the Gerer Rebbes. The Gerer Rebbes were real friends to the Rebbe, be'emes. Loyal, they supported the Rebbe, they stuck their neck outs for the Rebbe, they were leichem for the covet of the Rebbe in a real way, be'emes, in a generation which was full of hatred and machlekes and jealousy and kinah and sinah. Yizach Shmam Latayv, we're Lubavitch Chassidim. We really owe the Beis Yisrael and the B'Simcha Bunim and the Pinchas Menachem emes yashikoyach. They were Rebbes, they were tzaddikim, they were Balei Ruach HaKodesh and Balei Meifes. They were big people. And they have got to verstand in a große Mensch. You understand the derech eretz they had for the Rebbe was extraordinary, and they put themselves and their politik to an extent on the line for the covet of the Rebbe. So when the shliach comes from the Gerer Rebbe, it's a davar chashuv. You understand? So I don't know who he was, but he knew he's going to meet the Lubavitcher Rebbe as a representative of the Gerer Rebbe, and I imagine that he was a little bit unnerved. Wie nicht wie. So this is all happening in my head now. He prepared what he was going to say, and he walks in, he's introduced, and as the halacha is, the oval speaks first, and the Rebbe says in the introduction that when a couple gets married, they say that it's a binyan adayad. And the Rebbe explains that there's no interruption, that it continues, that it's a bit forever. Now, the chiddush of it was that usually when you say a binyan adayad, we always assume that it means the children. Unfortunately, that's not the case. So the Rebbe is clarifying, your kind and nish kind, binyan adayad, it's forever. And as soon as the Rebbe doesn't say we had no children, it's self-understood. As soon as the Rebbe finishes giving his pitch, he goes into his rehearsed drasha. What's his rehearsed drasha? When the third Gerer Rebbe, the father of the 3 Gerer Rebbes who the Rebbe worked with, lost his first Rebbetzin. He was very, very broken, and I forgot the language. He didn't know how he could go on. The point is that the Gerer Rebbe articulated the end and how you can't live without it. So as he's telling this to the Rebbe interrupts him. The Rebbe answered him before he said a word. But again, I'm assuming that anybody else would have been in that position. He prepared a speech, and he really didn't listen to what the Rebbe told him, because he had to say his thing. So the Rebbe answered him before he had a chance to open his mouth and told him, Sabinyan adeyad. It's forever. And because it's forever, the kind of sadness that he tried to describe to the Rebbe, for which he was then going to be Menachem the Rebbe deflected. It's a story with a lot of Rebbe ingredients. Anyway, but as somebody pointed out, if we want to learn Tanya, we should do it first, because if I start telling stories, that'll be the end of the Tanya. Kvar hoya le'elamim. So let's do some Tanya, and Mitzvah Hashem we'll do afterwards. We'll talk about the Rebbe's wedding anniversary. There's so much to tell. So much. I teach in Beis Rivka. So I teach all the girls in seminary. So I have two groups of seminary Beis, one group seminary Aleph. There's so many people in my room, I don't know anybody's name. It's just 50 kinder, 50 girls at a time. So whenever the Yom of the Pagra, I have to fabreng by the Yom of the Pagra. So what I do now is I start the story with the first group, I finish the story with the next group. So everybody gets a shtickle maisa, and anybody's entitled to send me an email, I'll send them all three parts. But there's so much to tell about the relationship, the marriage, the Rebbe and the Rebbe. One more. No, but I'm going to learn Tanya. Believe me, I want to learn Tanya. That the Rebbe was, I think I told you on Friday also, the Rebbe was living in Paris, and there was a Yid named Bez Baratka. He was an acquaintance of the Rebbe. He was from Jew, Orthodox Jew, but he was a modern man. And he knew the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin. The Rebbe would go into his business. I don't know what kind of needs the Rebbe had that he would meet, but they joined a club. There was in Paris at that time, there was a club of Jewish intellectuals, Jewish scientists, and there were two frum members, two Orthodox members, the Rebbe and this Mr. Bez Baratka. And he describes this club. They meet once a month, and he describes the time that the Rebbe spoke. I'll tell it to you a different time. I've told it to you before. This you can see on Gem. This is all the Living Torah. And the early years, if you have the early years, they're really special. But anyway, so one day he was sitting with his mother in his business, and his secretary walks in and says, Mr. Schneerson is here. Monsieur Schneerson, Mr. Schneerson is here. So he tells the secretary, okay, I'll come in a minute, and he turns to his wife, to his mother, and apologizes that he has to see Mr. Schneerson. And his mother says, wait a minute, Mr. Schneerson? Schneerson is royalty. He had no idea that Schneerson was anything other than a name. He had no concept. And his mother says, this is Lubavitch. So he was obviously taken aback. He had this relationship with Mr. Schneerson. He didn't know who he was. So he walks out of his office, he goes to see the Rebbe, and he asks the Rebbe in the course of the conversation, Hastua Shayches, he must have spoken in French, with the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Do you have a relation with the Lubavitcher Rebbe? And the Rebbe smiles and says, and again, I'm assuming that he spoke in Yiddish, because the way he said it was not his words. Musje is sein Tochter. The Rebbe smiled and says, Musje is sein Tochter. Is there a humbler way to answer that question? He didn't say, I'm his son-in-law. He didn't say, I'm the great-grandson of the Tzemach Tzedek. He said, Musje sein Tochter. That's it. Musje sein Tochter. Okay, let's learn Tanya, and the next time we'll talk. Okay, so last week we started Perek Gimel. Yeah, we read all of 2.5 lines, which is like an amazing achievement for us, right? If you were here last week, you know that the discussion was about the word koyach. Last week we started Perek Gimel. It was about the word koyach. Perek Gimel, that's page Zayin Amud Aleph. It was about the word koyach. And I explained to you, we had a good conversation, I thought, that koyach has 3 translations. It means a possibility, a potential. It means a strength. But more than anything else, it means a tool, a kle'umnis. And the reason this is so important is because it needs to be underscored that tools have no conscience. Whether fire cooks food and warms people or destroys property is entirely determined by the one managing the fire. Fire doesn't care what you use it for, because fire is a thing. A koyach is a tool. Your brain is a tool. You're a person. The idea that your brain can determine right from wrong is a terrible misnomer. Brains understand things. They process like computers. How you use the brain is determined not by the brain, but by the mahus, by the nefesh, by the neshama, by the human being. And it's appreciating that division is very serious and very important. Because if you don't, then you get into trouble, as we see in Elam Hazar. Okay, so now, I want to continue this conversation. And here's where I want to go with this, okay? I'm going to repeat last week's conversation, but in a very, very different way. I'm going to say the same things we discussed last week, but it's not going to sound the same, because I'm saying it from a very, very different angle, from a very, very different perspective. Everybody has an neshama, right? Everybody has an neshama. I have a neshama. You have a neshama. He has a neshama. She has a neshama. Lahag Goy has a neshama. It's a different kind of neshama. A Yid has a neshama. A Goy has different neshamas, but a Goy also has a neshama. And you could even say that by definition, a neshama is good. How it is in a Goy, because the Goy comes from Klipas Noiga, is a different story, but everybody has a neshama. The neshama is a piece of Hashem. It's a piece of God. Which means the neshama is everything good. The neshama is kind, the neshama is wise, the neshama is generous, the neshama is forgiving, the neshama is humble, the neshama is plastic, it's flexible, the neshama is adaptable. The neshama is all the things we wish we were, you understand? In the neshama, it's right. But the neshama is infinite. The neshama is Ein Sof. Because the neshama is Ein Sof, the neshama only understands one language. It's black and white. If it's right, it's right. If it's wrong, it's wrong, and that's the end of the conversation. The neshama speaks in an infinite language. In other words, when the neshama says whatever it says, and we're talking about, let's say, the nefesh l'kis, yeah? Whatever it is that the neshama says has to be that way exactly, in an infinite way, because that's all the neshama knows. There's a right and there's a wrong, there's a true and there's a false, and that's the end of the conversation. So if the neshama, so in the language of Chassidus, this is called Gilui HaNefesh. Gilui HaNefesh means when the infinity of the soul speaks, when the neshama in its infinity speaks. When do you see Gilui HaNefesh? Gilui HaNefesh is Mesiras Nefesh. Gilui HaNefesh is extreme tshuva, it's Gilui HaNefesh. And in terms of koichos, in terms of expressions, will. Ratzon is called Gilui HaNefesh. Will is not considered an emotion. Will is considered the whole neshama speaking, which is why will has an urgency and a determination and a single-mindedness that can go through a mountain. It has no constraint. So the neshama is infinite. When the neshama speaks its language. It's an infinite language. It's infinitely good, but it's an infinite language. It's a language of Ein Sof. So imagine a neshama speaking to a neshama. If they get along, it's good. Yeah? But if they don't get along, they cancel each other. They burn each other up. Why? Because if, like Lein Nagu covered Zebazeh, right? The story of Talmidei Rabbi Akiva. If one neshama sees something one way, and the other neshama sees something the other way, and each one's sense of righteousness is infinite, because it's the neshama in its raw, without any screens, without any levushim, without any containments, expresses itself. So the way it sees it, the way she sees it, is the way it has to be. There's no room in the same universe for two neshamas, let alone for billions of them or millions of them. Why? Because the Ein Sof of the neshama can only do it black and white. It's infinite. The neshama is an infinity. I didn't say like. I said agree on how to do something. Because there's different characters to neshamas. There's neshamas of chesed, there's neshamas of gvura. The Eibishter made different expressions of the character of the neshama. So they like each other, but the minute they start to say how you should do something, each one sees it differently, and there's no tolerance, there's zero ability, there's no room for compromise, because compromise, everybody loses. Like Hillel and Shammah, yeah. And the Eibishter created a world.
I thought that two neshamas together become one. Only the goof is the one that's making...
That's also true. But in order for that to happen, it has to happen through the goof. The shamas and Gan Eden don't really communicate. It's funny to think. The shamas and Gan Eden just is. They exist. Relationships, the way you and I know relationships, are here. Over there, it's a different world. The Neshama in Gan Eden is curled up like a fetus. But a fetus is small. In Gan Eden, curled up like a fetus is infinite. There's Ein Sof. Each neshama with its own Ein Sof. And the Eibishter put us in this world. and wants us to have more than one person on this planet, yeah? Even more than one couple. Should be lots and lots of pru or vu. Pru means replace yourself, and vu means multiply yourself. Have many times, yeah? So how... Okay, but don't do this. The correct answer to the question, as far as I understand, is no, and please not go any further with this. I don't want to go there. No, ich weiß, es steht amal azay, bepashtes nishamas lamayla are connected to the Eibishter. Finished. I understand, but it's very sensitive and emotional and personal. So how does it work? How can more than one neshama occupy the same space? So the answer, he puts us in a goof. The goof does a lot of allowing for more than one. Why? Because in the very simple and meaningful sense of the word, the goof means I'm in one place, I'm in another place, I'm in one time, I'm not in another time. So you're in your goof, I'm in my goof. So there's automatically room for the two of us, yeah? But we walk in the same streets, we meet in the same shul, we shop in the same shops, or I'm buying from you, or you're selling to me, or I'm selling to you. We interact, right? So the goof helps more than one neshama be in the same space, not neshamas burning themselves up. But there's another thing. And this other thing is very important. And the other thing is that neshamas, as we know them, neshamas beguf, don't speak, for lack of words, they don't speak neshamis, if there is such a language. The neshama doesn't speak in its raw neshama form. It doesn't. Except in rare occasion. Tshuva is neshama. Have you ever watched someone do tshuva? Have you ever watched a Baal tshuva in the throes of tshuva? I have. I went out of my way. It's the most amazing thing. A human being, a bus of Adam, and his avas Hashem, his single-minded attachment to the Eibishter is literally ein safe. Ein safe. 6 months later, he's like the rest of us. Those people who did tshuva and remain by their tshuva, and I remember such people, but very few, are Pasha Tzadikim. What can I tell you? They just get lachkeit. But the average Baal tshuva, to do tshuva in today's world, that makes no sense. There's so much klippah, and it's so low. How does a neshama break out of all of that? It's a keichelaki, it's a matana. It really is correct to say it's the Rebbe's koiches. But when a person does tshuva, this is how Yechidish Nefesh looks. You can watch it. Go into a Baal Tshuva yeshiva. I teach Baal Tshuva girls. I was a Baal Tshuva girls. I don't get too close to, but I was a bach in yeshiva. I went to Maristan. I hung around downstairs. They called it. There was upstairs and there was down. There was a gzeda. It was kedem bittel a gzeda. Over there was kedem matanteda. El yenim was the temchpimim. Tachteinim was the feres, and al yenim lo yedel tachteinim. But tachteinim yalla al yenim, they would lynch him. You understand? But I was al yenim. I loved to hang around the Balei Tshuva. I was a 16-year-old bachar. I was very sincere. I bet I was. In those days, I was a chassidish bachar, and tshuva freaked me out. These guys were 3 years older than I was. That's it. I was 16. They were 19, 20. They grew up in secular homes, not with kosher, and not with Shabbos, and not with Yom Kippur, and not with mikveh tara, and they became chassidish bachrim. I couldn't understand it. And I would talk to them. I used to ask them. I actually wrote down. I would make one of the things that I did. Tell me, and everybody has a moment. It's a pashat yachida moment. It's not at all a person. A person can't make such a radical change. It's a pashat akeich eliki that the yid has a pintel yid, and the pintel yid cries out, and the person does tshuva. How many people we know they did tshuva? And it's nicht gehalten. It didn't stay, unfortunately, but they did tshuva. Tshuva is an incredible. It's a fantastic phenomenon. And by the way, it's not the pshat they're doing tshuva from Avedas. They never sinned in their lives. The tinekish and nishvul lebeinu umis. But still, it's yechidish benefesh. We don't live that way. He or she is not going to live that way. Wait 6 months. It's what happens. Every Bali tshuva, Rubam Kakulam, 99.9%, go through a resolution where one girl said to me, I started, however she worded it, doing tshuva, I started to see miracles. And then all of a sudden, the miracle started stopping. Stopped. She saw Lakus. Maybe she looked, she saw Getlachak. And then she stopped seeing Lakus. Favos, because this was a matnes elikim. The Eibishter gave her. I say it as tshuva. Now she has to spend her whole life making herself into what the Eibishter gave her. That's really what happens. So we don't live on the Yechida level. You see, this is how we get along. The Eibishter created a system, and I hate to use this word, but I'm going to use it anyway, where we're able to navigate the same space because we're not speaking in the language of the neshama. The neshama is Ein Sof. The neshama is infinite. And if we spoke in the language of the neshama, two neshamas would either be the same or they would cancel each other. There's no room in the same world for two. Yada ein as Ein Seif, and Ein Seif gerecht. Ein Seif right, Ein Seif justified, Ein Seif doing what the Eibishter wants. But the other neshama has a different character and consequently a different approach. There's no room. So the neshama speaks through funnels, through things that temper the Ein Seifius of the neshama. And I want to make it clear, I'm talking about the Nefesh HaLekis. The Nefesh HaBahamis is a whole nother story. There's the Nefesh HaBahamis and there's a Guf and there's Levushim. I'm talking about the neshama itself. If you could imagine, even a tzaddik who doesn't have a Yetzer Hara, a tzaddik who doesn't have a Yetzer Hara does not always speak from Yechidish of a Nefesh. A Rebbe does. A tzaddik speaks from his seichel, a tzaddik speaks from his midas, a tzaddik speaks from his chushim. In other words, even if you're in touch with your infinite neshama, your involvement with other people is on a finite level. And that's what koiches are also for. Last week's conversation, right? The Eibishter gave us a neshama. And in Perek Beis, in chapter 2, we discussed the source of the neshama, the infinity of the neshama. That's the chelik lekami mal mamash, right? We spent 10 classes. You tell me how you learn Perek Beis for 10 classes. We managed to stretch it out and to tell ourselves we're not being repetitive. Yeah. And we learned about neshama, that even if you have the smallest neshama, it's still connected. Which is chachmei Allah. Everybody's neshama is a chelik lekami mal. And you get to Perek Gimel and you find out that this chelik lekami mal, besides for the guf, and besides for the Nefesh HaBahamis, and besides for the Levushim, and besides for Elam Hazeh, the Neshama itself is designed not to speak on the language of Ein Seif, but to speak on the language of Gvul, and Yischalkus, division, detail. And this is what the Koiches are for. Koiches means the Eibishter gave you a mind. Speak what the Neshama has to say intellectually. The Eibishter gave you a heart. Speak what the neshama has to say emotionally. The Eibishter gave you sensitivities, chushim, re'iyah, shmiyah, tam, reach, mishush, right? To see beauty, to hear beauty, to smell beauty, to taste beauty, to touch beauty. Speak the neshama through the chushim. And this is tricky. Why? Because the correct answer is, I can't. If my neshama is infinite, so I'm going to explain infinity rationally. I'm going to communicate infinity through a limited emotion, which I can share with another person, and there's going to still be room for the other person in the room. I'm not going to burn him up. But that's one of the reasons we have koiches. This is very ideal. It's very hoich. But this is one of the explanations for koiches. The Eibishter gave us tools. This is how we live. Or to say it in applied words, in religious words, a halacha has to be paskin from the Torah. Right, somebody mentioned Beis Shammai Beis Hillel. It says in Likutei Torah that Beis Shammai paskin the halacha is based on its teva of chesed, and Beis Hillel paskin the halacha is based on its teva of gevura. Right. So I'm asking you a question. That's in a Beis Hillel paskin based on its teva of chesed, and Beis Shammai paskin based on its teva of gevura. I said forget before. That's amazing. I heard myself say it. I heard myself say it correctly, but okay. I'm going to ask you a question. That's how you paskin a shaila based on your feel? What kind of objectivity is this? If a Rav tells you befedish, my personality is chesed, I'm going to find you a het. My personality is gevura, mistamel metonisht. What's Farah Ravi does? What's the answer? The answer is they argued. And Beis Hillel couldn't come to Beis Shammai and say, I feel. Beis Shammai says, who cares what you feel? I feel forget. My feeling, your feeling will burn each other up and fatig. Beis Hillel says, look, it says in the page, it says in the book, Ushet Chesed. And Beis Shammai says, no, you're reading it wrong. It says Gevura. And they argue, and they argue, and they argue, and they argue. If one of them can show the other one that in the Torah it says one thing and not the other, there's no Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. It's finished. Everybody agrees. The only time you have in a Mishnah, and you have it hundreds of times, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is Beis Shammai opened the Sefer Torah and showed in the Sefer Torah its kav, and Beis Hillel tried 1,001 ways to show that Beis Shammai is wrong, and Beis Shammai was able to deflect every taina and to show it says in Torah Beis Shammai. So Beis Hillel cannot say you're wrong. Beis Hillel could say I see it differently, and Beis Shammai tried the same on Beis Hillel. Anytime there was an argument where one side was able to show the other that the Torah is not supporting their position, those machlekes are not in Shas, they're not machlekes. Why? They were looking for the emes. And the emes is not in their neshama. The neshama is infinite. And because the neshama is infinite, their neshama has an infinite leaning in the direction of chesed, the direction of gevurah. The question is not what they want. The question is what the Eibishter wants. How could the Eibishter want different than me? And the Torah says he's also mamish. So what does the Eibishter want? He wrote it in a finite book with a limited number of words. And in the language of the Gemara, Teirehi v'lil medani tzarech. If it's Torah, you can understand it. Don't give me hergesh. And this is how the emes of Torah emerges. Beis Shammai's neshama can tell him anything she wants. If Beis Shammai cannot find the support in Torah for what the neshama is saying, it's not the Eibishter's ratzon. And that's what matters. The Eibishter's ratzon. If Beis Hillel cannot find in the Torah what the Eibishter says, nobody cares. This is how Torah works. So if in other words, you want to think about it, you could almost say that it's possible that there were things in Beis Hillel's neshama that are incredible, and the Eibush doesn't want them. Finished. So it's not in the Torah. If the Eibush doesn't want them, it's not in the Torah, Beis Hillel's never going to do them. It's not his. He has to do what doesn't Torah, including things which are inconsistent with the will of his neshama. So this is called the Eibush creating an imposed limit on what would be otherwise a runaway train of Ein Sefius to have emes. Not the emes of this neshama, not the emes of this neshama, the emes of the Eibishter's will. And in very practical terms, this is how people interact. How do people get along? Because each one comes to the other in a reasonable way. In a reasonable way. If you wanted to say it a little skeptically, you would say any time a person does something and you ask them why, and they give you an explanation, you could say it's a lie. That's not why you're doing it. You're doing it because you want it. This is how you're explaining it to me. And there may be truth to that. But in the real world, that's how we live. The reason there's room on this planet for more than one or two, and if you think about it, and this is, if you've studied Lahadl Aleph Avdos, if you study animals, you understand that animals have something called critical space. Critical space means how much space has to be between one animal and another animal. The most complex and sophisticated, I don't want to use the word animal, on earth is a human being. And we live closer to each other than any animals could. It's an amazing thing. And of course, anthropologists will never notice this because you have to say only bad things. People can live on top of each other. Kipshute. I have an apartment building, there's someone on top of my head. Kipshute b'pashtas. And I can hear him. And I sleep anyway. Animals can't do that. They're totally unnerved. There has to be enough space. Human beings have figured out to live very close. That's why there's so many of us. We build up, we build down, we build out, we find places to live very close. Besides, I'm saying who lives in your apartment. I mean the guy across the hall. It's an amazing achievement of tolerance. It's an amazing ability to live with other human beings. Again, we'll never pay attention because people have this to always see the world as negative. Big cities are an expression of the goodness of humanity. If people were very selfish or very afraid of one another and they couldn't tolerate each other, you couldn't possibly have big cities. You'd kill your neighbor just in case you think he may kill you. When I was people were more spread out. People learned how to live closer together. And it comes from what? From there's enough space for me and there's enough space for you. Why? Because they put up a wall. What about my Ein Seif? My Ein Seif speaks inside this wall. This is what gave us koiches. You can have a conversation with another person and you can even make a compromise. A pshara, I want this and you want that. Let's meet halfway. The neshama, in its goodness, can't do that. The Eibishter puts on the neshama koiches, and the koiches limit the neshama. So here's, you see, it could be healthy and it could be unhealthy. You understand? In a sick person, the koiches and nefesh cover over the neshama. You use your seichel to say the opposite of what the neshama wants. In a healthy person, the koiches express the neshama, but they express the neshama as that limited koyach speaks what the neshama is. The neshama wants to learn Torah and do mitzvahs, and the seichel says, "Abam dafes nishlaf," you have to eat and sleep. You understand? So the koiches hanefesh, the tool that the Eibishter puts on a neshama, limit the neshama. The job of a person is that through the koiches, the neshama should come out. When a person is sick, when a person is diseased, spiritually speaking, the koiches hanefesh become a klipa. They cover the neshama. In a healthy person, the koiches nefesh express the neshama, but they can never say what the whole neshama is because the neshama ain't safe. But this is what the Eibishter wants. You understand? The Eibishter didn't create our neshamas to be infinite. V'harayeh, he put two of us in the same universe. V'lo idella, he didn't put two of us. He put 2 times 2 times 2. Vifel, we're billions, right? And the Rebbe would say, "Kein yirbu." You know what the Rebbe would say? "Kein yuvesa the ma'aseh." One of the most incredible things that I've heard, the Rebbe said a lot of things that surprise people, but this is mind-blowing. In Israel, they were talking about the fact that Arabs are taking over Israel, pushed by attrition. They have more babies than us. The only people who are having children are from it. Unfortunately. They're having more children than we're having. So they're going to populate us out of existence. We're going to become like a Mitzrayim, become the minority.
I'm going to have 10 wives.
So the government of Israel had this idea that they were going to stop paying the medical expenses for L&D, labor and delivery. And I don't know how the Rebbe was consulted. The Rebbe said, you can't do it because Goyim have a mitzvah pru'ervu. You know how open that the Rebbe of ours, if that doesn't surprise you, this is mamish peladik. You could say that the Arabs are a reidef mamish. They're sucking your blood. They're taking your life. And the Rebbe says, a goy has a mitzvah to have babies, you have to support it. This is what he told the Freie Israeli government. In the typical spirit of the Rebbe, how should Jews behave? Don't give me Ben Gurion, don't give me 48, don't give me Tzion, and that's how he answered the question. It's remarkable. Because every human being is an expression of the Eibishter, and the Eibishter wants gvul. The Eibishter wants that we shouldn't speak infinitai, whatever word you would use to say that language, because then there wouldn't be a lot of people, and there wouldn't be, kol atera kula leinitna ella. Finish the sentence. Last says shalom ba'elam. You can only have shalom if you have machlokes. I don't mean machlokes punching each other in the nose. Separate people. So the Eibush takes the infinite neshama, boxes it in, contains it in koiches gvulim, so that you and I can live in the same world. So the koyach, which is covering over the neshama, is serving the neshama. And again, the avoida is, the trick is, that the koyach shouldn't suppress the neshama. It should speak what the neshama wants to the extent that it can be spoken. Like I gave you the example for a Rav paskin a shaila. A Rav can't paskin a shaila by how he feels. A Rav has to paskin a shaila, doesn't tell it. So the fact that his neshama has a certain hergish is gvaldik, but if he cannot align his neshama with the Shulchan Aruch, nobody cares about his neshama. Who cares as Nebish is Teira, because we call that emes. Amichasa shel Teira is not my will, it's not your will, it's God's will. Now how do I put aside my will, and you put aside your will, and do the Eibishter's will? The neshama can't do it. The mind can. The heart can. The body certainly can. If you have humility. If you have bittul. Verstehst? And this is another. I'm saying the same thing I said last week, but a very different thing. It's exactly the same speech, aber es ist ganz an andere. Because this is such koiches. The Eibishter gave the neshama koiches, because this allows the neshama, which is by itself ain't safe, to function in a level of finitude, of gvul, and to interact with another neshama. The challenge is, the nesoyin is, the avoida is, that the koyach should reveal the neshama. To the extent that my mind can express what my neshama is, my mind should express that. As opposed to my mind becoming a klipa over my neshama. If you learn Torah, and you're a yeshin metzias, and you're in a bal gaiva, your Torah is covering over your neshama. If you learn Torah, and there's a bittul, there's an anivas, there's a humility, your seichel, which is limited, is expressing the intzef of the Eibishter. And the same is true in all aspects. And this is another insight into koiches hanefesh. The Eibishter gave us tools which control the neshama in a finite way, so that the neshama on a regular basis, on a day-to-day way, speak in a finite fashion, so there's room for more than one of us in the same world. That's how it works. Now, of course, this idea when Mashiach comes, this is v'ata tetzava, that you bridge the gevul and the bli gevul. It's a whole complicated, wonderful story, but we're leaving that alone. Okay, questions or comments?
You can just mention what was the name of the Talmid Rabbi Akiva in the sense where you were speaking.
The Rebbe says it's nesiches. Rabbi Akiva was the one who said, the Rebbe says this. So you can imagine the Talmid Rabbi Akiva were very busy with the mitzvah of they went around loving one another. But each one had a different flavor. Why? Because each one had a different personality. And they were devout. They were chassidish. You understand? So no one would tolerate the next. Loi nagu kavod zeh in the hera of Yafta Lecha Kamaycha Zeh Kal Gadol B'Teira. Like the Rebbe's medayik, nagu kavod zeh. What does kavod mean? I have my way and you have your way. I'm not changing my way for you. But there's room for your way also. Loi nagu kavod zeh means since I understand that my way, your way is wrong, and I'm going to fix you. That's the loi nagu. Just look at the sichas.
Yeah, but only what you're explaining now about the shamas and so they didn't do this like you said with the
They didn't negotiate. They didn't work it out the way they were supposed to. It's exactly right. Yeah. The Gemara says that in the time of the Zugis, time of the second base Hamikdash, there was no machlokes. Almost no machlokes. Why? Whenever the Chachamim had a disagreement, they would sit and argue until one convinced the other. It's machlokes. The machlokes in start, they had one machlokes that do with the Zugis that goes back to the time of the beginning of second base Hamikdash, or do with smicha. One machlokes, yeah. Hillel and Shammai, that means the man Hillel and the man Shammai had 3 machlokes. And Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai had hundreds of machlokes. And why? Shaloi Shimshu Kol Tzarkan. It was a difficult time. They didn't get enough shimush. Didn't sit by the Rosh Yeshivas long enough to learn how to paskin a shaila, and they got stuck. In other words, the reason they couldn't negotiate to a consensus, they couldn't navigate till they would all agree that the Torah says one way, was a deficiency in their limud Torah. But each one stood his ground, and that's why you have machlekes and you have the paskin. Let's take a break, yes? And then we'll talk about Yudalad of Kislev. Okay.